FFMPEG, libx264, how to specify a variable frame rate but with a maximum? Instead of providing a fixed frame rate to FFMPEG/libx264 or /framerate, I would like to specify a variable frame rate with a maximum value, and allow libx264 to down the frame rate as it sees fit. The idea here is to get extra compression when there is something like an extended still frame, which happens a lot in my source videos. I realize that a predictive or bidirectional MPEG frame will compress really well, but it's also possible that the source frame rate is smaller than the one I intend to transcode to, possibly resulting in a bigger stream.
Frustrated that you hadn't found an answer either, I was going to at least answer other people's questions about how to enable VFR, not VBR, output from FFMPEG. The answer to that is the oddly named sync option. You can set it to a few different options, but the one you want is 2 or VFR. From the man page. Sync parameter. Video sync method. For compatibility reasons, old values can be specified as numbers. Newly added values will have to be specified as strings always. Zero, pass-through. Each frame is passed with its timestamp from the demuxer to the muxer. 1. CFR. Frames will be duplicated and dropped to achieve exactly the requested constant frame rate. Two. VFR. Frames are passed through with their timestamp or dropped so as to prevent two frames from having the same timestamp. Drop. As pass-through but destroys all timestamps, making the muxer generate fresh timestamps based on frame rate. 1. Auto. Chooses between 1 and 2 depending on muxer capabilities. This is the default method. Note that the timestamps may be further modified by the muxer after this. For example, in the case that the format option avoid _negative_ts is enabled. With map you can select from which stream the timestamp should be taken. You can leave either video or audio unchanged and sync the remaining streams to the unchanged one. However, I don't quite have enough reputation to post a comment to just answer that sub-question that everyone seems to be having. But I did have a few ideas that I wasn't honestly very optimistic about. But the first one I tried actually worked. So, you simply need to combine the sync to option with the $max option, of course where you replace $max with the maximum frame rate you want. And it works. It doesn't duplicate frames from a source file, but it will drop frames that cause the file to go over the maximum frame rate. By default it seems that $max by itself just causes it to duplicate/drop frames to achieve a constant frame rate, and sync to by itself causes it to pull the frames in directly without really affecting the PTS values. I wasn't optimistic about this because I already knew that $max puts it at a constant frame rate. I honestly expected an error for it to just obey whichever came first or last or whatever. The fact that it does exactly what I wanted makes me quite pleased with the FFMPEG developers. I hope this helps you, or someone else later on if you no longer need to know this.
I would like to specify a variable frame rate with a maximum value, and allow libx264 to down the frame rate as it sees fit. The idea here is to get extra compression when there is something like an extended still frame. In my understanding, This may be possible in a comparably clumsy way, but is undesirable for some complex and counterintuitive reasons. Even though an x264 stream has a frame rate is more a container level problem than a codec one. In a pass-through VFR encode, there will be what is essentially a text file detailing what the frame rate is over what frames/times, and in encoding a source, a function like file in or file out past the timestamps through to the encode, to map the rate locations and keep the video subjectively consistent from source. The low frame rate idea is a logical one, but doesn't work out for several reasons. Though x264 is VFR aware with some capabilities, I don't think there is an analysis function that will vary the frame rate with regard to motion in order to lower the file size, in a way analogous to the mini bitrate controls. The source is also a problem. VFR sources will by default retain their frame variability, but apparently encoding a CFR file at variable bitrate, a good idea sometimes, especially when telecine is needed, will simply produce the same CFR. This means you would probably have to rewrite bitrate by hand, i.e. timestamps of slow scenes muxed into the file, or resort to a frame decimation algorithm like DUP, dedup, and exactdedup for avsynth. If your video does have extremely low motion, some frames, even half, would be thrown out. The problem is that these algorithms are not advanced, and don't make good choices with real-life footage as to what will contribute to the best encode. Also, removing frames that contain things like I and B frames reduces the amount of detail available over time, which causes motion to look steppy and can interfere with the other basic video parameters and cause artifacts like aliasing. And because of the way the quantizers work, x264 will actually decrease the bitrate disproportionately further in these scenes of low motion. Unless you have a slideshow of identical images, there will be motion, if only grain and other artifacts, and there will be a loss in quality that would not be seen without drastic changes to the bitrate. And finally, the reason there aren't many options to do what you want is that x264 is really good at managing bitrate just using temporal compression, recording changes in partial frames. Going to half frame rate will not cut the file size in half. 10% is probably a realistic gain to expect from low motion or animation. So in short, dropping the bitrate of your static scenes will do very little for your file size, but will add a host of quality and sync issues, not to mention incompatibility with video editing software. If you do want to try a decimator, you might be able to limit the maximum new frame rate by using the levels options, each of which species a maximum resolution and frame rate. Unfortunately, you would probably have to work at very low resolutions to get the kind of frame rates you want, using profiles. It comes back to editing the rates by hand, either entirely or to correct frame rates you think are too high. Either way, it will take juggling to keep the sound in sync with the new frame rates if alterations are made after the encoding process when the file is conserved. The takeaway is that spending time optimizing the mini bitrate settings will yield much more in the way of file size management, and improve the quality of your video, rather than cause complications for little gain. Preserving the original FPS is probably the best idea unless you're aiming for broadcast or media standards. Players are well designed to handle varying bitrates, unlike nulls, and the more frames in your video, the smoother the playback and perhaps the smaller the file size, due to smaller changes in motion between frames. Here's a collection of links to standards info and forum discussions that should help with this confusing aspect of encoding. avsynth decimation tools. FPS and R switches. x264 General, File, FPS timecode file standards. Levels and profiles. Short, clear CFR/VFR setting summary, framerate section. Doom 9, video help, and AMP, see theoretical discussions. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7.
Perfect solution, Reduce repeated very similar frames and save output at peak variable frame rate. For content with long still scenes, dropping duplicate frames can reduce the frame rate dynamically and significantly low to achieve more file size reduction than the codec and its intra-frame compression can ever achieve. In my example, 100% original mezzanine file size at 60 fps, 15% SAR28 at 60 fps constant frame rate, 6% SAR28 at 60 fps peak frame rate, almost a factor of 3x. Original available. FFMPEG screen recording. Move flags fast start C column V libx264 VF decimate sync VFR a 120 preset Verizlo CRF 24 screen recording VFR.mp4. Transcode already compressed video to dynamic frame rate without re-encoding. FFMPEG video export old.mp4 VF decimate sync VFR video export decimated without re-encoding .mp4. In detail. Original available. FFMPEG screen recording. Move flags fast start C column V libx264 VF decimate sync VFR a 120 preset Verizlo CRF 24 screen recording VFR.mp4. Convert already exported video to dynamic frame rate without re-encoding. FFMPEG video export old.mp4 VF decimate sync VFR video export decimated.mp4. This is a lossless operation. No lossy re-encoding happens, only repacking/re-referencing. It will drop as many duplicate frames as it can. Example. Slideshow of only 3 still images with no transitions, each lasting 5 seconds at 50 fps equals 750 frames. FFMPEG will reduce it indeed to just 3 frames at 1/5 equals 0.2 fps. Confirmed with MediInfo. Analysis and AMP learnings. Videos with long still image scenes can get their frame amount and file size significantly reduced. For both scenarios, encoding from the mezzanine file at the same CFR maintains visual quality, but file size reduction from constant to variable frame rate is 15% to 6%. Frame rate reduction without re-encoding brings less of a file size reduction, but still brings file size reduction 15% to 10%.
If you want to support the channel, please consider subscribing.